not meet what I consider to be an imminent threat.
How do you think the administration should tomorrow? Do you have a comment?
Senator Menendez.
Senator Menendez.
Heads up, guys.
I went into this briefing today. I went into this briefing today with some critical questions that I wanted to hear the answers to. The imminency of the threat, the nature of the threat, the intelligence that would lead us to understand that eliminating Soleimani alone would eliminate the threat. And I walk away not only unsatisfied, but it draws real concerns for me that we do not have the type of information that is critical for members of the United States Senate to make. Don't feel too bad. That's what they did to us as well. They closed the briefing rather quickly. So, anyhow, we have more questions than we have answers at the end of the day.
Watch yourselves.
Good. Have you talked to him?
Just a quick, I'm Tom Carper, Delaware. Just a quick history lesson. 5 or 6 years ago, the idea came up, well, why don't we try to negotiate a deal to reduce the likelihood that Iran will develop nuclear weapons? Some folks in this body thought that was a bad idea. Actually, some folks in Iran thought that was a bad idea. They thought that they should not engage with us. But they did, and we reached an agreement. An agreement called the JCPOA. It worked. Among the people in Iran who thought it was a bad idea, who thought they should not negotiate the JCPOA, was Soleimani. They thought it was a bad idea to negotiate, a bad idea to actually enter into that agreement. You know what happened with that agreement? Iran kept the agreement. 17 rounds of inspections, 17, no, they kept their word. There were elections 3 years ago. You know what happened in those elections? The moderates swept the field. Elections, city councils, mayors, the parliament. Today, the moderates have been diminished. And you know who's been raised up? The radicals, the Ayatollah, people like Soleimani. That is not a victory. At least that's not the kind of victory I think we want.
So, Senator Murphy, Senator Merkley, and I, and others, we just want to make a few comments about our takeaway from this briefing. You know, we can read about the judgments administration officials make in the newspapers and in the media. These intelligence briefings are supposed to focus on facts behind the judgments, so we can make an independent evaluation of the judgments that are being made. And I would say that the briefing was incredibly thin on facts, and to the extent that they provided facts, in my judgment, they did not support any claim of an imminent threat that would justify the actions they've taken with respect to eliminating Soleimani. And it's important that you have that justification. It was one they gave. I did notice in President Trump's remarks at the White House today, he mentioned that they were engaged in planning attacks. The president himself didn't use the word imminent this morning at the White House. And it's an important distinction because I just want to think about everyone to think about this. We're engaged in a very, very tense situation with Iran even before the latest actions. The United States military plans what targets it will hit under certain circumstances. It's not surprising that the Iranians will also determine what targets they may hit if they are attacked by the Americans. So the idea that people might be planning to take certain actions is not surprising, just as we plan to take certain actions under certain circumstances. So the takeaway from my perspective is that they did not establish in any way the facts that would support the claim of an imminent threat that was posed, meaning that someone had decided to attack U.S. forces and kill lots of Americans. Let me turn it over to Senator Murphy.
Yeah, let me concur with Senator Van Hollen's analysis. I was deeply surprised at the lack of information presented by the administration regarding a specific imminent threat. This appears to me to be a strike of choice by this administration, one that likely would have required congressional authorization beforehand. The consequences of this strike already in the first 6 days have been cataclysmic. Our troops are being pushed out of Iraq. Iran has started its nuclear weapons program again. All counter-ISIL operations have been halted. There are serious political consequences to the decision that was made. And we did not get information inside that briefing that there was a specific imminent threat that we were halting through the operation conducted last Thursday night. And I can say I was, I think, both surprised and saddened to not have that information before us. I think it is likely because it doesn't exist. But the fullness of the briefing is complicated by the fact that it only lasted 75 minutes. After waiting 6 days, the administration barely gave 100 senators an hour. We left with multiple important questions that were still unanswered. And I frankly think it's not just unacceptable to not present intelligence, if it exists, but it's also not sufficient to give the United States Senate just over an hour of time to explain a military action that likely has grave long-term consequences for our security.
I'm just going to say one thing and then let my colleagues take over. There were so many important questions that they did not answer. We did not see a plan, a satisfying plan for the future. We had 97 senators there. 15 got to ask questions. As the questions began to get tough, they walked out. I've asked for a commitment that they all come back within a week. We have not yet gotten that commitment. Thank you.
One of the things that was very troubling is there was no indication that there was due thought given to the consequences of the action. Before the action against Soleimani, we had massive protests in Iran against the Iranian government, and now we have massive protests against the U.S. No clarity that this was understood how it would affect the unity for the radicals and undermine the moderates in Iran. No sense that they had considered that the fact of an attack in Iraq without the permission of the Iraqi government would undermine the authority of the Iraqi government, which had a formal relationship with the militias. No sense that they would interrupt, if you will, the training of the troops who are taking on ISIS. No sense of how this would impact the increase in nuclear refinement being done, enrichment being done by Iraq. No sense that they had considered how this would put the assets of our allies at risk. In fact, quite frankly, there was no presentation at all of a comprehensive understanding of how the consequences might hurt all of our strategic initiatives in the region. And in that sense, this was very frustrating. It seemed to reflect a very rushed and reckless action.
In addition to what my colleagues have said, as we look forward, one of the things that concern me as well is that looking at the new race to a nuclear weapon for Iran and the fact that the president has said he will not let that happen, when asked whether or not they would come back to us before taking action going forward, they weren't willing to answer that. So what is the threshold? What happens when the intelligence says that Iran is within 6 months or 3 months of a nuclear weapon, and they then choose to take action? Does that require congressional consent? I would argue yes, it does. And we had no indication at all from them that they might feel they needed to come to Congress to get support for that action. It was deeply concerning today.
The last thing I would say is I think we all know that Iran and Soleimani's strategic objective in Iraq has all along been to push out the United States and reduce our influence in Iraq. They've been very open about that for years. And our strike, what we did, actually is allowing Iran and Soleimani in death, not in life, to be able to accomplish that objective because we've already seen actions calling for the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces. There is no doubt that our position in Iraq today is weaker than it was before. And I think we are all seeing the result of that right now.
Can you explain why it seems like Republicans had a totally different briefing? That they seem convinced that there was this.
They'll have to explain to you that